And we're live. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Claire. I'm the event coordinator for Village Books and Paper Dreams in Bellingham and Linden, Washington. We're so delighted that you could join us tonight. Before we get started, there are a few things I want to let you know about Crowdcast, about what you're seeing on the screen. In the upper right-hand corner of your screen, maybe it's that way to you, you'll see a green follow button. If you click on that green follow button, then you will see events that we have coming down the road. We do have events on Crowdcast and on Zoom. So if you want to see an entire list of what we have coming on our calendar, then you can go to villagebooks.com and see everything that's coming. We have a lot coming. So I encourage you to do that. Speaking of which, on Thursday night, we have a special event at 5 o'clock, something that we actually haven't, we've done this in person, but we haven't done it online yet. So on Thursday night at 5 o'clock, we are going to do a bookseller happy hour. And this is actually going to be on Zoom. I am putting the link in the chat right now because this is going to be a fun event. At 5 o'clock, on Zoom, we are going to have the three owners of Village Books and Paper Dreams. So Sarah Hutton, Kelly Everett, and Paul Hansen are going to be on hand in a rotation talking about their favorite picks coming up. It's the perfect time to hear good book recommendations because the holidays are around the corner, but also it's that we're heading into that perfect Pacific Northwest reading weather, right? So Thursday evening at 5 o'clock, that's the bookseller happy hour, and the link is in the chat, or you can go to villagebooks.com and find more information on that. Also, another event that I must mention is Friday night at 6 o'clock on Crowdcast. We are going to have a group reading by the Red Wheelbarrow Writers. They have created an anthology called This Uncommon Solitude. It's an anthology of pandemic poetry, inspired by what we've all been going through in these last several months. So I encourage you to join us also on Friday night at 6 o'clock. It's going to be a great group reading. And again, the book is called This Uncommon Solitude. So if you have questions this evening, we are going to keep the chat enabled on the right-hand side of the screen. If you have questions or comments, the author tonight would love it to have an audience engagement. So if you have chats, if you have feedback or questions, please feel free to put those in the chat down there on the right-hand corner of the screen where it says say something nice. And I appreciate that it says say something nice because that's where I need to remind you that the Village Books virtual readings gallery is a safe space. Any user exhibiting offensive, hateful, or inappropriate behavior will be dismissed from the event immediately. So if you want to put your questions in the chat, feel free to do that, or you can also use the Ask a Question feature that you see at the bottom of your screen. You can see there's already one question in there. If you click on Ask a Question, a little dialog box pops up. You can type in your question and we'll just kind of capture them there and hold them until the Q&A or until Shelby is ready to address your questions. And then lastly, this green button right here, Purchase Your Grief Your Way Here. That is a direct link to the Village Books website where you can purchase a copy of Your Grief Your Way. We do encourage you, if you're feeling inspired this evening and like what you hear and are feeling moved by and thinking that you might want to buy the book, that's where I'm going with this. We encourage you to go to the Village Books website by clicking that green button and purchasing a copy of Your Grief Your Way. We would appreciate it. The author would appreciate the support, and so would Village Books, because it is through book sales that we are able to provide this free event programming. And thank you to anyone who made a contribution at registration. We do very much appreciate that. So, all right, that's enough of me yammering on. So now the fun part, a little bit about our guest this evening. Shelby Forsythia, she was just telling me how it's so great that I can pronounce her name correctly. And I want to say Forsythia. Shelby Forsythia is the author of Your Grief Your Way and Permission to Grieve. And she's the podcast host of Coming Back, Conversations on Life After Loss. Through her books, podcasts, and live events, she helps people reclaim their power and peace of mind after devastating loss. Her work has been featured in O, the Oprah Magazine, Huffington Post, and Modern Loss. She's here this evening to present this book right here. Your Grief Your Way, a year of practical guidance and comfort after loss. So, please join me in welcoming Shelby Forsythia.
Hi there, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And thank you especially to Village Books for putting on this event. Those who know me and are familiar with my grief work know that I recently relocated from Chicago to Washington State entirely based on intuition. And this has been nothing but a welcoming community for me and my grief work so far. So yes, we're here tonight to talk about Your Grief Your Way. This is unlike other daily devotionals for grief in that it is not religious. There is no mention of any religious background or prescription or subscription. And also, there are just these tiny little pieces of practical information that can help you come back to life after loss again. And Your Grief Your Way is intended for life after you lose a loved one to death. But if you have other losses in your life, divorce, major diagnosis, major move, pandemic, the thing that we're experiencing all collectively right now, a form of collective grief, it's also pertinent for that too. I'm very used to hosting live events, so I would love to hear from you in the chat box on the right-hand side, or whichever is the right for you, as well as submitting questions on the bottom. If there is a day of the year that's important to you, whether it's your birthday, a loved one's birthday, an anniversary, a death anniversary, a grief anniversary, something that is of any significance to you, I would love to read that entry for you live on the air tonight. So if there's a date you'd like me to read, I'd love to start there. And actually, for all intents and purposes this evening, I'll start with November 17th, so the day of the calendar that we're on right now. I see Lori's in the chat. I see Lisa in the chat as well. Thank you so much. This is the first time I'm launching a book with a publishing house into the world after self-publishing my first book. And so the whole experience, A, of publishing a book in general, but B, publishing a book during a pandemic has been especially surreal, wonderful, amazing, blindsiding, and unexpected in so many ways. If I can cram that many descriptive words into one sentence, I certainly will. So yes, flipping to November 17th. This is so pertinent for today. I did not make this up. I did not choose this date specifically for this reason. But here's the November 17th entry from Your Grief Your Way. Young adult literature, especially if it's fantastical or magical in nature, can be a marvelous tool for processing grief. Despite being written with kids in mind, series like Harry Potter, The Chronicles of Narnia, His Dark Materials, and the Little House books touch on themes of grief and loss while also exploring friendship, courage, and growing up. You might find inspiration and community in the stories of others working to face adversity while living rich, complicated lives. And I love this because one of my very favorite authors, Gretchen Rubin, who pioneered the Happiness Project, Better Than Before, and so many other books, she speaks about when things are hard in your life or when you're struggling to know what to do next, oftentimes reverting back to things you loved to do as a child, such as reading children's literature, is a really powerful way to tune back in with something that's comforting and soothing and can help you feel a little more ballasted or tied on to something solid at a time when everything is really chaotic and your foundations are falling apart. And so returning to children's literature or even visiting children's literature for the first time as an adult is a phenomenal way to show yourself, almost like proof, that there are other people, even fictional people, who have survived great and tremendous loss with other elements of their life, love, family, relationships, magic, the supernatural, school in tow. So it's not impossible to carry all of this, but it can certainly feel that way in the aftermath of loss. Yes, Kathy says, hi, my name is Kathy. If you could read May 26th, it's the day we lost my son Joe to fentanyl poisoning. He was just 19. And Kathy, my heart goes out to you here because child loss is something that's spoken about quite a bit. I'm not sure where you're in the world you're located. It's spoken about quite a bit in the United States and Westernized society, but so often it's exclusive to loss of an infant or a baby. Kathy says, I'm in Georgia. Yes, thank you. And so often there's almost a glossing over of loss of a child in teenage years or adult age. And I think that has to do with our Westernized society, like glorification of youth and innocence. And this is not to diminish anybody on the call who may have lost a child or a baby, but so often the people around us fail to acknowledge and honor that our losses are real just because the person we lost is a little bit older. So my heart goes out to you and to your son as well. Moving over to May 26th. And this is a quote entry. So the way that, quick segue, the way that Your Grief Your Way is ordered is there's 2 entries for every page, which is a little unusual for a devotional book. But because of this, there's a quote at the top of every page, and then there's a practical tip or an exercise at the bottom of the page. So it's like you kind of get to even, odd. You get to oscillate between simply resting and allowing information to arrive, and then being called to do something, whether it's a journaling prompt or a practical exercise or delving into children's literature. And they're always paired with each other in some way. They're always affiliated, but they're not always directly connected. Like the connection's not always quite obvious. Okay, so back to May 26th. It says, "You can't control what comes up, only how you respond." And this is a quote from Dan Harris. My commentary on this says, "The death of a loved one is a glaring reminder that we are not in control of everything. There are some things in life that just fall out of our jurisdiction, and death is one of them. We can't control the fact that we've lost someone we love. What we can control is how we respond to it." And this is especially hard for loss due to drug poisoning, because it feels like as a society we have failed our loved ones in a way. It feels like something we can control. And so I could see, Kathy, and don't let me put words in your mouth or over your experience, but I could see how this would be especially hard or difficult for you. There are many losses and griefs that exist. I can even draw some parallels right now with the COVID-19 pandemic, where our quote unquote village elders, the people who are tasked with taking care of the larger body of humanity, are failing at some level, and preventable death is an enormously big grief. Yes. Amy says, "Hello, Shelby. September 9th is my mother's birthday. We lost her to suicide 15 years ago." Yes, and suicide is another difficult loss because society likes to spin the narrative that suicide is preventable, and maybe it is. And also mental health is something that's enormously swept under the rug in this country. And for what it's worth, Your Grief Your Way is secular, which we mentioned already, so there's no religious notions in here, but there's also not a pointing to or a ranking of different types of loss to death. So this is not a book that will mention, parent loss, child loss, loss of a spouse, loss of a sibling, loss of a family member, loss of a friend, explicitly or directly. It is really intended to be, the phrase that's coming to me right now is a blanket balm for all kinds of loss due to death. And there's no kind of death that is excluded from the material in this book. It was written with the intent to be applicable to all losses to death. Flipping to September 9th right now. Another quote. "When we share in each other's grief and pain, we lighten it. Or maybe we just give each other permission to feel it fully. And through that act of acceptance, the grief becomes more bearable. Because, like the rain, tears too have an end. And with deep emotions, we are open to each other in unexpected ways." Karpov Kinraid. Grief shared is grief lightened. And sharing our lost story with others, whether we simply speak our loved one's name or connect with their memory on a profound, deeper level, we shift from I and I alone am carrying this to we are carrying this together. There is relief in being seen by someone else and knowing that they just get it. And this is something, Amy, that I refer to in my work with one-on-one clients and in workshops too, about this sense of having joined the grief club. When you walk into a room full of people who know what it is, who know what it is like to know the life experience of having lost someone to suicide, whether you're walking into a physical room or whether you're walking into a virtual space, the amount of unexplaining that you don't have to do, like the amount of storytelling, the amount of putting a mask on so that others understand that you don't have to do, is overwhelmingly relieving. So I walk into a room and my greatest loss, I should probably have opened with this. I lost my mother suddenly to breast cancer when I was 21 in college, and I had to navigate, and I'm continuing to navigate the entire rest of my life without her. And when I walk into a room, virtual or physical, because right now we're in a pandemic, of other people who have lost a parent, I was like, I do not have to explain myself to these people. I don't have to justify my emotions. Nobody's going to call me crazy. It is just such a relieving experience. And when I was writing this piece of Your Grief Your Way, I was very much reminded of when I was trained trained in grief work, and it was the very first time that I had been allowed, because we had to go through the training in order to offer the training to other people publicly. It was the very first time that I was allowed to sit across from somebody else and to receive their grief story and to have mine received. And even though we were drudging up the very worst things that had happened to us, the forgivenesses that we needed to make, the apologies we needed to say, and the things that we never got to say thank you for, because this was the structure of the program I was trained in, oh my word, the buoyancy that came over me as a result of that was tremendous, because I think everybody in the comments knows, and even if you're not commenting, if you're just watching, you know the weight of carrying something you feel like is not allowed in a space or in a group of people. It's tremendous and overwhelming and heavy. And gosh, I used to use this phrase of, I feel like I was wading through mud with iron boots on. And gosh, the amount of effort it takes to simply survive while carrying grief is tremendous. Yes, and Amy says I was 21 as well. Yes, and losing a mom at 21, losing a mom at any age, but especially I did a podcast interview for another show recently, and the host referred to your early 20s as your launch pad years. And so to have the wheels taken out from under the plane, to have the wings snapped off as you are launching into your life, especially here with the way westernized society is structured, always that caveat, because the way we grow up is not the way others in other countries grow up. There is a kind of dismantling, there's a kind of taking out at the knees that happens. And you're looking at all these other 21-year-old people around you who are successfully, as far as we can measure that, launching themselves into the world, and you're like, there's no way I can follow that trajectory anymore. Grief has made it so that is no longer true for me. And that is another kind of loss on top of the loss of a mother. Yes, absolutely. And Jayden says, so thankful for your perspective, and thanks so much for joining me here tonight. I want to get into, and please keep leaving your dates that you'd like me to read in the comments. I'll keep responding to them. And if you have a question about the book or about the work that I do, please click the Ask a Question button, and I'm more than happy to answer it there as well. From what I understand, you can upvote other people's questions, and so you can help me rank which one to answer first if you'd like to do that. I was asked to write this book by Penguin Random House in January of this year. I'm not sure how much all of you know about the publishing industry, but usually books take anywhere from 2 to 3 years from writing to market. And so to be approached to write a book in January and to have it on the shelves already at the end of September, this book was released 9/29, which is an interesting and significant date to me. To have it released in less than 9 months was an absolutely wild experience, and it meant something I didn't know that I was signing up for at the time I said yes to writing this book. I ended up writing this book within the first 2 months of the pandemic. So as COVID-19 was shutting everything down here in the United States, from about beginning of March to mid-June or so, I was writing Your Grief Your Way. So as the world was entering a time of collective grief, I was writing a daily guidebook for a year's worth of surviving life with grief. Granted, this is death of a loved one, and COVID-19, while that is true, also includes job loss, major moves, mental health, depressive episodes, all of that kind of lumped in together. There is a collective grief we are experiencing right now, but it was very surreal because the first few days of the pandemic, I lost both my day jobs. I lost the ability to freely travel in the world, as so many of you did. I lost my routine. I lost access to friends and family. I lost access to places and people that I loved. In addition to that, there were the haunting and the numbers and the mental health crises and the sleepless nights and the anxiety and the rumination of things that ramped just higher and higher and higher. So many incredible parallels to the first 6 months of my mom's death. And to be writing a book in that time about grief and loss, was absolutely an experience I could have never predicted, made it extremely hard at times. And also, as I was writing the words on the page, this is something I try to channel when I'm writing, is writing to my 21-year-old self. I'm like, what did she need to hear that no one in the world was telling her? And that's where I write from. And then I'll kind of call in images of people that I work with as clients or people that I do in workshops and see, more or less ask them like they're invisible imaginary friends in the room and say, would this resonate with you? But even more so now, as I was writing Your Grief Your Way, I was like, will this resonate with the world right now? Which is kind of a tall order to ask when you're an author writing a grief book in the middle of a pandemic. But also it really helped me take the message from the very personal, my grieving 21-year-old self, to the universal. And so I was selecting these quotes and these exercises. I'm like, could people do this right now in the midst of COVID-19? Because Lord knows how long this thing is going to last, how long we will be swaying on a rope bridge after having left the security of a cliff. Yeah. Yeah. How long will we be here? We have no idea. And with the exception of a few practical tips in here that ask you to take a class, to try something for the first time, or to go out to a restaurant, most, I would say 95% of these entries you are able to do them wherever you are in your grief. They're journaling, they're mindfulness, they're reframings. One of my very favorite ones that I used from an online course that I actually decided to print and publish in Your Grief Your Way is the phrase "while grieving." And this is something that, as you're going about your day, can give you more freedom, ease, lightness, room to breathe. Even right now, I'm taking a deep breath in the aftermath of loss, because something that we do when loss happens, it's like there was life before the loss happened and there's life after. And we're so close time-wise in proximity to the life that we used to live, we still think we're capable of doing things like we used to do. So getting our kids ready for the day, sleeping through the night, being productive at work, walking the dog, feeding the pets, doing the errands, whatever, because we remember so closely what that was like. It's like, it's not that long ago I was able to accomplish all of those things. We beat ourselves up endlessly and tirelessly about all the things we are no longer able to accomplish because of the exhaustion, the fatigue, the anxiety, the worry, or even just the menial administrative tasks that often come with the death of a loved one. And so adding this prepositional phrase "while grieving" onto the end of every single task you have to do during your day. I'm brushing my teeth while grieving. I'm getting the mail while grieving. I'm taking care of my kids while grieving. I'm walking the dog while grieving. It doesn't necessarily add more weight to your experience or add weight to your story. What it does is expands the story so you're telling the whole truth. It's no longer, I'm just walking the dog, it shouldn't be that hard. It's, I'm walking the dog while grieving. And seeing that as a reality and a truth of your story helps you honor, oh, crud, like, yes, that is true. I am doing all of this while recovering from the very worst thing that ever happened to me. And if that can help you give yourself just an inch or a shred or a crumb of grace or room to breathe in the loss that you're facing, it's absolutely incredible. And you can use this with your friends too. I challenge you to use this the next time you talk to a friend or family member right now. And you can say, in the midst of a pandemic, you don't have to say while grieving, but you can say, do you realize you're trying to organize virtual Thanksgiving in the midst of a pandemic? And see if telling the whole truth of what's happening, the whole story of what's happening, helps them ease the pressure up on themselves so they don't feel as if they're carrying so much or are forced to fit into some expectation of a life when things were not in a pandemic. It changes how you see yourself in your grief. And when you change how you see yourself as a grieving person, you can give yourself more freedom to be human, or more permission to be human in your work. Yes. Jen says February 17th, 1997, President's Day. My brother-in-law was lost at sea in Alaska. Yeah, and that points to a loss. This is something, truthfully, Jen, that I know less about, which is grief or loss with no answers. You might find some tremendous help in the work of Modern Loss, as well as What's Your Grief, which are two online blog hubs for writings about grief and loss. But they speak so often about grief with no answers, or grief where there are unknown factors involved. And so I can see how kind of that layer would come on top of the loss of your brother-in-law. Yeah, absolutely. February 17th says, and this is a practical exercise in the even-odd order, studies show that doing something kind for another person can actually improve our mood. Hold a door for someone, give a compliment or a warm hello, or let someone cut in front of you in line. See how it feels to perform an act of kindness for someone else. Picture the recipient of your kindness as your loved one, and imagine them with a grateful smile on their face. And this is something I like to do, especially when I'm really riled up in the grocery store right now. There are people in front of me who are slow, or hoarding all the toilet paper, or having a phone conversation while a poor harmless cashier is trying to check them out. I feel this rage or this frustration building. And then I'll pause. Okay, stop. This is a very human thing to have happen in a pandemic. Again, we can add those words of permission to ourselves. What if the person standing in front of me in line is my mother? What if the person standing in front of me in line is my brother, who I lost at sea? How can I treat them kindly? How can I give them a full 6 feet of space so they don't feel rushed by me right now? How can I hold a door for them as they're pushing a cart out or walking out with their groceries? How can I carry an umbrella or um, offer what I have to somebody else who needs it? And if being kind to people is too hard, like the next level of that is, could you be kind to them if they were your loved one? Because sometimes there is an inherent like a bitterness or a resentment. Like, why should I be nice to anybody? The worst thing in the world just happened to me. Why should I be nice to anyone? Um, And I think for me, at least in some level, it proves or reminds me that we are each capable of generating something ourselves. Whereas grief comes in and we are crushed by that experience. We are crushed and ground up by the experience of loss. And that great weight has an enormous amount of power over us. Just like that Dan Harris quote I read earlier, we also have a power to speak back to grief. We also have a power to respond. And we can be angry at grief. We can thrash against it. Absolutely. Anger is like my favorite emotion to feel in grief. And people who know me and know my work in the comments will know that I love anger. And also we can choose to respond with kindness. And sometimes the hack for responding with kindness in a world that has been so unkind to us is to picture our loved ones as the recipients of our kindness, even if their faces, their bodies, their gender, their mannerisms, their behavior very much shows to us that they are not. Yeah, it's a really neat thing to practice right now, especially as so much of the world is focused on my safety, my health, my well-being, my family, my circle, my people. My. It kind of opens up this possibility to, yes, there is something global here. We are all grieving, and it is expressing in 1,000 different ways. Yes. Amy says, wow, that's powerful. Yes. Barbara says, could the same be said or thought about losing a father at the young age of 20? Sure. Oh my gosh. I believe you're referring to Launchpad years, in that losing somebody in your early 20s really takes you out at the knees. And I won't say it stifles you. I won't say it cripples you. I won't say that it hinders you in any specific way, because I don't necessarily want to push that as a narrative or push that as a story on you. It means you will have a radically different experience than a majority of 20-somethings in the westernized world who are leaving college, who are getting jobs for the first time, blah, blah, blah. But then you think about 20-year-olds right now who are graduating college in the year of 2020, and they are feeling similar and different kind of grief. They are being taken out at the knees in their Launchpad years. So whereas the 20-somethings that came before them and 20-somethings that will come after them will most likely have these kind of normal, as we have built them societally, experiences, the grief of 2020 and the changes that it has required of them, they have been forced to live a different kind of life. And parent loss in your 20s will absolutely do that. One other resource I'll drop in here is the dinner party. So if anybody in this group is ages 20 or 30 something, the dinner party is, right now they're doing virtual only. It's an international organization that pairs hosts with party goers. And it's essentially like a dinner party where you show up and everyone there has experienced the death of a loved one, and you're all in your 20s and 30s. And so there's this element of meeting virtually, grieving in a digital age where Facebook memorials and online obituaries and things are like the order of the day, or how do I grieve somebody if I can't memorialize their Facebook profile? So you'll find a lot of conversations like that in the dinner party, but also this recognition that loss does happen to people in their 20s and 30s. When I was in college and my mom died, I did not believe there was anyone else on my campus who was experiencing what I was going through. The isolation is the number one side effect of grief, which is incredibly, if you sit back and actually think about it, it's incredibly funny because everyone in the entire world has experienced some kind of great grief or great loss. The problem is, and the reason so many of us think we're alone, is that we're refusing to talk about it, or we're told it's not appropriate or polite or acceptable, or that we're broken or that we're wrong or that there's a problem if we're talking about it past 6 months, past a year, et cetera, et cetera. Westernized society is very good at pathologizing a lot of things, including grief. And unfortunately, grief is not a thing that needs or deserves to be pathologized. Yeah, absolutely. And Barbara says, my husband's birthday is August 2nd. He died of a heart attack suddenly on June 19th, 2019. Barbara, I'm going to let you choose. Would you like me to read August 2nd or June 19th? And I will wait for your comment to respond. Jen says, thank you so much. I love all of this. Jen, I hope you'll check out my work at shelbyforsythia.com. I have another book that's sitting on the shelf behind me. I won't pull it out right now because this is about your grief your way, but you can also find my other book through Village Books. It's called Permission to Grieve. I'll give you a disclaimer that the first 2 chapters contain some explicit swear words because I was retelling the experience of grieving the death of my mother in the day I got the news. So if you can handle swearing, especially as it pertains to grief, you can handle your grief your way. And I did a lot of illustrations in that book too that seemed to resonate with a lot of people. Yes, the thought of being especially kind to someone on that day of loss and imagining it's the person you lost. Absolutely. Barbara says, yes, because my children have lost their father, my husband, and they are all devastated. Yes. Love Christina. The dinner party has been my saving grace since my parents died. Highly recommend. And I do too. I relocated to Chicago pretty quickly after I graduated college in North Carolina. And the dinner party was like the first place I really went for grief support after I arrived. And just sitting in another room of people in their 20s and 30s who had also lost parents, I was like, I'm not crazy. I'm not the only one having this experience. And somebody else knows how to roast sweet potatoes. Like it was kind of, and everything has permission to happen all at once. We can talk about food, we can talk about Netflix, and we can talk about our dead parents. It's that similar thing that we were talking about where when you walk into the room and someone knows exactly of what you speak and you don't have to make excuses and you don't have to prove your emotions and you don't have to justify your own story. Gosh, the breath, the freedom in that is intensely and immensely powerful. Yes, Village Books. Thank you, Village Books. This is Claire behind the scenes. I love swearing. It's cathartic. I do too. Yeah, I appreciate books that swear. And Barbara's requesting June 19th, so I'll flip to June 19th here in Your Grief Your Way. Let's see. This is a quote entry. It says, it does not matter how slow you go as long as you do not stop. And of course, so many of us will know this is a quote from Confucius. Progress is progress is progress is progress in grief. Because your grief is unique to you and only you can't measure your healing alongside somebody else's. The only person you're competing with is the person you were yesterday. You can't even compare yourself to the person you were pre-loss. So go and go slowly, with the wisdom that even the tiniest step forward is a major win. And I love this one. I wrote this one because something that I have a tendency to do in my grief is compare myself to other people who are also grieving similar losses. So other people in their 20s, other people who have mother loss, other people who write books about grief. I'm like, where are they? How am I measuring up in relation to them? What are they doing? How far along are they? What's working for them? What's not working for them? And the amount of weighing and measuring and putting little grams of progress on the scale to see how we balance together. Oh my word, it's very exhausting. And also it keeps my eyes on them as opposed to my own grief, my own loss. And what happens in comparison is we fail to see the places that we need help and the places that we're hurting because we're so focused on how other people are getting so much farther ahead. And that's not to say it's exclusive. I believe very much, and this book is proof, that we can find power, strength, inspiration, motivation in the words of other grieving people. That's why this book is literally composed 20% of quotes from other grieving people, celebrities, authors, etc. And also, I'll include all of these contractions in here. We have such great permission to only compete with ourselves, to only measure against the person that we were yesterday. We cannot even measure against the person that we were before, because this goes back to this while grieving exercise, because the person we were before our loss was not grieving. They did not know that weight. They did not know that experience. They did not know that reality. And so we can even no longer compare ourselves. I can no longer compare myself to the girl that I was when I was 20, because she did not know what it was to grieve. And so as much as I would like to go back and be like, why aren't you that efficient? Why don't you wake up that early in the morning anymore? Why don't you sing in the shower anymore? I can't compare myself to that person because she did not know. That person back there, that girl back there did not know the weight of the death of her mother. There's something, and all of you will know this who are in the chat, there's something heartbreaking, irreversible about the loss of a loved one. You cannot unsee, you cannot unknow, you cannot untaste what that was like. And so to try to compare yourself to any version of yourself that came before, is it's almost an act of cruelty against the self and against the person that you are right now. Yeah, you deserve to only be compared to the person that you were yesterday. That being said, another tremendous organization for grief support that I believe is doing quite a lot around the holidays is Option B, founded by Sheryl Sandberg, who wrote the book Option B, which I'm sure you can also find at Village Books. She speaks about in her book how there are 3 P's in grief. And my absolute favorite of the P's, and the one that I see the most often when I work one-on-one with clients, when I do live workshops, when I do group grief support online, is permanence. This will go on exactly like it is, just like this, forever and ever. Amen. And the reason that this happens, one of the reasons that this happens, is because the experience of death is so permanent that our brains are like, okay, that was permanent, so everything that follows must be permanent too. Everything that follows this must also be permanent. So we're thinking the pain, the despair, the hopelessness, the powerlessness, the inability to have anything under wraps, the lack of control, the massive anxiety, everything is going to be exactly that intensity forever. And I challenge you, everyone who's on this call today, I challenge you to see if you can think exactly the same thoughts, to have exactly the same experiences at exactly the same time, in exactly the same way, wearing exactly the same clothes that you did yesterday. And these are tiny, minute changes. I know they don't feel like accomplishments or any kind of growth or any kind of progress in the aftermath of loss, but and here I am using contractions again. It is impossible for you to think the same day twice. So even watching a YouTube video that you haven't seen before, attending a live call with somebody who's talking about grief when that wasn't available to you yesterday, even that is some kind of growth or some measure of progress in grief. Even if you don't get anything from it, even if you don't take anything away or add it to your self-help checklist, it is a way in some small measure that you are growing and expanding. It's proof that you are still alive. It's proof that you're still alive. Yes. Kate says, my son died on September 16th. Kate, we're honoring your son here in this space. Erin says, hello, everyone. I'm Erin. My mom, Callie, died on 9/4/19, September 4th, 2019. Hello, Erin. Thank you. Jaden says, August 27th. So I'll flip to that passage as well. And Kate and Erin, let me know if you'd like me to read those entries as well, because I'd certainly be glad to. A lot of Septembers in this chat today. So just acknowledging that this came out on September 29th. We have a lot of September losses in the chat today. Yes. Flipping to August 27th. This is a highly practical one and a interesting to do over the holiday season and or now that Washington State is back in some kind of COVID restrictions. This is something I had to do on behalf of my family. August 27th says, if you shared a home with the person who died, you know the unique agony of continuing to receive magazine subscriptions and junk mail addressed to your loved one. These magazines and little pieces of paper can be enormous triggers for grief and can send you spiraling when you least expect it. For 1 month, place every piece of junk mail you receive for your loved one into a pile. Then, at the end of that month, make a list of all the senders' names and phone numbers. If a phone number isn't listed on the piece of mail itself, you can usually find contact information by doing a Google search. When you've got all the phone numbers ready, work your way down the list, calling each sender to request that your loved one be unsubscribed from their mailing list. If letting perfect strangers know that your loved one has died is too much for you to bear, outsource this task to a friend or family member. It's an easy enough job for anyone who tells you, let me know if there's anything I can do. Especially if you have a friend or a family member who's really admin oriented, like they come over to your house and they start cleaning and tidying things without you even asking. That's a really good task for them because it's administrative. It's you go down a list, you call the numbers, you use the same script every time. Hello, this person has died. They're no longer at this address. Please take them off your list. This is something I did after the death of my mother because I returned home 2 months after her death, and there was this pile, just a literal, visual, overwhelming, a stack of magazines and letters and subscriptions that she was attached to and continued to be subscribed to after her death. And so they were arriving to her house. And so every time my dad, my sister, myself would go get the mail, it was like, whoa, we just got punched in the face all over again. And it's not that we didn't want to be reminded of her grief, it's just that we weren't expecting it. And in the aftermath of loss, especially so close to when it's happened, seeing their name or receiving a piece of mail. My mom was like an Oprah Magazine fan and like not Focus on the Family. What was that craft magazine? Family Fun. Yeah, she loved getting that magazine and continued to get it even long after my sister and I were grown up. Um, and seeing these things that she was subscribed to, even the nonprofits that she donated to, was just over. It's like she'll never open these pages. She'll never smell these perfume samples. She'll never donate to this nonprofit ever again, because a piece of mail is always more than just a piece of mail. Your loved one's name on a piece of paper is always more than just your loved one's name on a piece of paper. And so to put all of this in one place, to make a list of everywhere that your loved one has appeared in the mailbox, and to systematically go down the list and just call until their name is unsubscribed. Not only does it free you up from no longer receiving their physical mail, so you don't have to recycle it, throw it out, keep it in a pile in the recliner, whatever you do with it, but it's kind of in its own bizarre way, it's an act of self-love. It's like I'm preventing myself from being triggered by grief or punched in the face by this experience every single time I go to the mailbox. It's not to say you'll never be triggered by anything else ever again, because we know that's not true in grief. But it's a very soft but very practical way to offer yourself some kind of space or some kind of love in an almost daily experience, if you get the mail every day like I do, in an almost daily experience that can feel as if it is haunting you. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Lori says, hi, Shelby. How about March 7th and March 21st? My dates of loss. Yes. And what's neat about Your Grief Your Way, something I'll interject before I read March 7th and March 21st, is that while this is dated, March 7th, March 8th, March 9th, March 10th, you don't have to follow the days. There's no overarching plot line that requires you to start in January and end in December. So literally, if you got this book today from Village Books, please buy and support from Village Books. Also, the only place you can get an autographed copy, because I can drive down there and sign them for you. When you buy this book, you could start today. You could start at November 17th, go to November 18th tomorrow. You could start there. So this is not, as much as it makes a wonderful holiday gift for somebody you love who's grieving, it's probably a good idea to have like 5 or 6 of these on hand, because somebody is going to lose somebody in the next 4 or 5 months or so. Statistically, winter is the time of year, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, it would be summer in the Southern Hemisphere, when people lose the highest rate of loved ones. This is partially to the seasonal flu, now with the pandemic, and also with the mental health crisis, slump, dark reality that comes with the seasons changing. So this is a very, very heavy time of year for grief. In addition to that, it's just the holidays. It's COVID-19. It's kind of garbage in its own kind of way to be alive right now. So please keep copies of Your Grief Your Way on hand, and tell people that they can start anywhere. It's not religious, and you can start anywhere. Okay, off of my off of my promotional box for a moment. Lori, March 7th reads, grieving is a journey that teaches us how to love in a new way now that our loved one is no longer with us. Consciously remembering those who have died is the key that opens the hearts, that allows us to love them in new ways. And this is from Tom Attig, who's another wonderful author on grief. My commentary says, I can hear you already, but I don't want to learn to love my loved one in a new way. It's normal to resist and reject the fact that death forces us to express our love for our loved ones differently. The good news is that our love never dies. We are just as full of love for our loved one as we were pre-loss, if not even fuller. We just have to determine where that love goes now that we can no longer physically be with our loved one. Everyone who has ever grieved has been where you are, asking, where do I put my love now? The answer is unique for each person, and it's okay if the answer doesn't appear right away. Keep your heart open to new ways of expressing your love, knowing there are all kinds of ways love lives on after a loss. And this is a struggle for so many people who are grieving, because it's like, I have all of this emotion, I have all of this love to give, I have all of this love, and it used to be directed to this human. It used to be poured into this beautiful recipient and channel for my love, who would also pour it back. And so we have these very generative relationships with the people we love. And when they die, it's like, I'm continuing to output, but there is no longer someone there to receive physically. And so there's this negotiation on the part of our brain, more on the part of our hearts, about, okay, where does all of this love go now? And as we were talking about previously, you can share this love with other living people, so acts of kindness by envisioning your loved one there. But I've also heard grieving people talk about giving love or pouring love into people who are similar to their loved ones, whether they're relatives, grandchildren, other family members, humans in the same demographic, of the same gender, of the same age, of the same disease or diagnosis that your loved one received. Maybe also love back towards the self. Maybe love in a spiritual or religious sense through signs, symbols, meditations, altars, rituals, kind of practices of that nature. It's like, where do I place all of this love? Because grief is a great measure, a great show of how capable, how greatly, and how deeply we are of loving. And so much of the struggle when we lose somebody that we love is like, I had all of this love and I continue to have all of this love to give, but now the recipient, the channel with which I was pouring, through which I was pouring, has gone, has died permanently. And so it's almost as if we have to dam up that river and divert it to all of these other places where our love can now flow, because it still very much exists, because we are still very much alive. Yeah, absolutely. March 21st for Lori, and then I see Kate on September 16th. And again, I'll spend the last like 10 minutes or so asking questions that are in the questions box. So if you do not have a passage for me to read, but want to know more about the work that I do, the loss I experienced, anything about the writing of your grief your way, if there's any interesting stories behind it, which there are, please pop a question into the questions box, and we'll have those read in the last 10 minutes of the call or so. Where am I going? March 21st. March 21st is also a quote. Grief and memory go together. After someone dies, that's what you're left with, and the memories are so slippery, yet so rich. Mike Mills. One of the most difficult realities of grief is that what's left of our loved ones, aside from any physical objects we choose to keep, lives only in our minds. Memories are all that we have of them, and because they are no longer alive, we don't get the chance to make new ones. We're left with a finite bank of moments to draw on. We can trigger these memories ourselves, but sometimes we'll find ourselves remembering a moment with our loved ones when we least expect it. Fond memories of my mom come rushing back to me every time I hear the hymn, It Is Well With My Soul. Each time I hear that song, I feel as if a little treasure has been uncovered in my mind. In that moment, my mom is right there with me. And this is neat, kind of literally speaking to what we just talked about. So it's funny, March 7th and March 21st are connected. It's like when the love is gone, when the person is physically gone, what happens to how we store them, how we think about them in our minds and in our hearts. And it's like, if all we're left with is memories, we have to find new, inventive, and creative ways of continuing to bring them into existence in our lives, because we can no longer rely on their physical presence to show up because they've died. Yeah, really, really hard and tricky to do, and also not impossible. Something that takes a great amount of practice and also is not a hopeless or a lost cause. And Lori says that's my song too, so I'm getting a little bit of chills there that was on the same day. Kate's requesting September 16th. Oh, Kate. I wrote this book, so I have a lot of favorite passages in it. Toot my own horn as an author for a minute. But this is one that continues to be a regular practice for me, because it's something that not a lot of people talk about, and I'll tell you why after we read it. September 16th reads, practice grieving a dream by holding the experience of it in your mind and then watching it slowly dissolve like sugar in warm water. Close your eyes and picture a future experience you thought you were going to have with your loved one. This could be a milestone event like a wedding, or a more intimate scene like sitting on the front porch together when you're old. Bring in all of your senses. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you taste? What do you smell? What can you touch? Additionally, who is with you? Where are you? What are you wearing? And what time of year is it? Really paint a picture of the scene, and know that it's okay to cry during this exercise. Hold the dream in your mind for a couple of minutes. Then, when you're ready, take a big deep breath in, and as you exhale, watch the dream fade away. Just because this dream was only a picture in your mind doesn't make the loss of it any less valid than a real, tangible, and human loss. Come back to this exercise anytime you need to grieve the death of a dream. And this one is harder because dreams, the things we hope for, the things we expect, the things we long for to happen in the future, the things we picture, um, we don't have a societally deemed ritual for grieving those things. We know that when somebody we love dies, there will be a funeral, a memorial, a shiva, a ceremony, some kind of ritual. Even now, when things have moved online, there will be some kind of something to honor the fact that a life is gone. But we have so few, zero, rituals for grieving the death of a dream. And when somebody that we love dies, everything we hoped for, everything we expected to happen, things we were hanging our hats on, even if no matter how fantastical or imaginative, they also die with them, because now that this person has died, this collection of dreams is no longer possible, at least in the same way and in this living lifetime for them and for you. And so it's necessary, in addition to grieving the death of a loved one, to grieve all the dreams you had with them. And please don't try and do them all at once. That's very exhausting, I've learned, just to try and dissolve like 20 cubes of sugar in water all at once. So maybe a daily practice or a weekly practice is just coming to this place of, what's the dream that I'm grieving right now? What's the thing that I'm going to hate missing in the future that I need to release right now? And to release is not to forget. I think to release is to honor, to bless, and to acknowledge in some way. Nowhere in this book will you hear me say you need to move on or let go or get over it. This is not that kind of book. And this is not a book that expects you to be healed by December 31st. This is not a book that prescribes any sort of action plan or path for your grief. It's just a reminder, A, that you're not alone, B, there are small ways out of this, and C, gosh, that grief is ongoing and that it's possible to integrate it into your life. There will come some kind of day when it is no longer your ruler or the only thing within your line of sight. Yeah, but not in a fluffy way, not like in a, I'm going to send you a lot of promises and then you have to believe them kind of way, because who really believes that? But this opportunity, this possibility that it's, you are able to live a good life with grief. And even if you can't have that story or that sentence be true for you right now, hopefully this book will be some kind of prop up or some kind of assistance to be like, even if you can't picture that life for yourself, the possibility exists. And you don't need to have faith in that story for yourself. You could just have faith in the possibility that one day it is coming your way. Yeah. Yeah. And the neat part about Your Grief Your Way too, something I'm telling people, especially as we're going into the holidays, is you can do this with another person. If you met a friend through a virtual grief writing group, if you met somebody here in this chat whose story you really resonated with and you know them, or know a way to reach out to them, it's a really phenomenal book to just say, hey, let's do this book together. Let's read the entries. Let's do the exercises. Let's see how they resonate with us. It's also something you can keep tucked in your nightstand and not tell a single person about. It's a book where you are very free to make of it what you will. And there's also no obligation to buy into all of it. So if there's an entry or a quote and it just pisses you off and makes you mad and you want to throw the book against the wall, please by all means do it. That's a part of your grief journey and a part of your experience. And I honor that in you as the reader. Yes. And Kate says, thank you for reading about dreams. I've got the questions popped up, so I'm going to start reading those if that's all right. And then the last probably 2 minutes or so, I'll turn it back over to Claire at Village Books. So if you have questions, please submit them in the questions bar below. So I'm no longer taking dates to read, but if you have a question about my book, my work, Your Grief Your Way, the writing of it, anything else you'd like to know about my lost story, all puns intended, I am an open book. Cheryl says, why is the USA so good at so many subjects and brilliant with research all over the place, but when it comes to time off work or sibling loss, next to nothing? Yes. This is something that Claire and I were actually talking about before we got on the call today, because this question was submitted in advance of our conversation. So Cheryl, I hope you're either here or will watch the replay at some point. But the United States excels in a lot of things, gathering data, gathering information, statistics. And I think you're pointing to this in your question, but especially when it comes to grief in the workplace and grief with the loss of a sibling, there is a lot of dishonoring that happens. This is a longer answer, and I'm sure there are other books that exist on it in the world. But if you look at any book about productivity or any book about grief in the workplace, there is a very clear delineation about emotions at work versus emotions not at work. And grief, because it's kind of this amorphous blob of an experience, there are triggers that pop up at any time. It affects you in such a profound way, an unpredictable way. It's not really allowed in the workplace. You're supposed to arrive back at work, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, be productive, get the to-do list accomplished. And there's this story that grief does not belong here. And sometimes it's more than a story. Sometimes it's actually a statement in companies that do not have a bereavement policy, in companies that do not care or care to care about their employees' mental health, or yeah, even offer things like parental leave for both or more parents. Um, because even becoming a parent is a grief event. You are stepping through one doorway you can no longer step back through. Yeah. And so there is a kind of cruelty or a kind of mistreatment that happens in the workplace with regard to grief. Somebody doing tremendous research in this space, I'll give you two resources. Elisa Forneret, Alica Forneret, is doing beautiful work on grief in the workplace, especially for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. How their grief is expressed in the workplace, especially right now with the events of the summer, the Black uprising, and with the COVID-19 pandemic affecting marginalized groups in the United States as well, and then just grief in the workplace overall. She does some tremendous work. And then there's a gentleman by the name of R, the initial R, Glenn Kelly, who has, I believe, a whole book about grief in the workplace, but he teaches a series of workshops online, to the best of my knowledge, the last I checked with him, about grief in the workplace. Sibling loss, now this is a totally different category. The westernized world does not honor sibling loss as much as other losses because the loss of a sibling is considered a greater loss hierarchically. Westernized society ranks grief, which is garbage. We don't believe in that here. As more of a loss on the part of the parents. So society focuses on the parents who have lost a child as opposed to the sibling who lost a sibling. Even to the point where people will tell a child who has lost a sibling, you are all your parents have now. You have to be strong for your parents. You have to be the role model now because you're their last hope. You're the last kid standing. You're the role model. You're the picture now. You have to carry on for both of you. Like, what an enormous amount of weight to put on a child. And also the way westernized society ranks losses. I'm using heavy air quotes here because this is not something I do or teach in my work. But loss of a spouse and loss of a child are often the most heavily acknowledged losses in westernized society. And this is not to invalidate them at all, but using these contractions again, there is a dearth of information in the world about sibling loss, even though it's something that happens all the time, because chances are when someone has lost a child, someone else has lost a sibling. To plant some more resources into your brain, the Dougie Center out of Portland, Oregon, which is local here to the West Coast, does some remarkable work with grieving children and their families. And so it sees the family as a unit, especially with loss of a sibling/child in the family. So that's a great resource to look for. Amy says, I love you and your podcast. Would like to be a guest, talk to you, share my mission. Sorry, I'm butchering this. And message about my mom. How do you go about choosing your guests? Unfortunately, /fortunately, I'm concluding coming back tomorrow as a podcast in a series. This is something I just announced semi-privately last night to my Patreon supporters, and we'll be announcing on a public scale tomorrow. So the podcast is coming to an end after 3.5 years and 10 seasons of grief guests. So I hope that you'll continue to listen to the next two podcasts that I'm making. One called Grief Book Review. I'll be reviewing books about grief and loss, and you can submit books to review at shelbyforsythia.com and find me on the contact page. And another podcast called Grieve Better, where I'm sharing insights that I've shared privately one-on-one with clients in a public space, of course, without disclosing client information, but tools, reframings, journaling prompts, mindset changes that can really alter how you see your grief and how you see yourself as a grieving person. And both of these podcasts always are open to all losses, including death, divorce, diagnosis, and the full gamut of 42 major losses that human people can experience in the world. Yes, and I see Village Books putting my website in there, shelbyforsythia.com. Oh, as well as other resources, Alicia Forneret, as well as other resources I mentioned. So now we're getting to the last minute. I'm going to put my hands up and surrender. Thank you so much, all of you, for tuning in tonight. You can grab your grief your way with Village Books, and I will turn it over to Claire.
Wow. Thank you so much, Shelby. I was riveted. I feel like your book is so appropriate for everyone. And I'm not saying that because I have my bookseller hat on. I'm taking my bookseller hat off. Hat is off for a second. Honestly, even if a person is not grieving about someone specifically at one given time, the entries, as I was looking through it while you're talking, as I was listening to what you're saying, the entries, they're wonderful for everybody just about any time, I think. And the September 16th dream exercise. Wow. Thank you for that. Thank you for all of it. So yes, okay, bookseller hat back on. Yes, you can purchase both of Shelby's books from Village Books if you click on that green button center screen. It'll take you to the Village Books website. But I just want to say thank you so much. Oh, and Jen wants to know, what was the last resource mentioned that also includes divorce, etc.?
Oh, Jen, yes. Everything that I do, literally with the exception of Your Grief Your Way. This was written for death only by order of my publisher. But everything I do includes death, divorce, and diagnosis, including my podcast Coming Back, which, while it's ending, will continue to be available wherever you listen to podcasts for free, as well as on my website. And then 2 new podcasts I'm launching, Grief Book Review and Grieve Better, which are coming in January 2021.
That's great, and we will want to know what books you're going to be reviewing. Absolutely.
Yeah, and they'll all be purchased from Village Books, by the way.
Oh, excellent! Thank you. And remember, we do have signed copies of Your Grief Your Way, so please bear that in mind, folks. Well, Shelby, do you have any final words for our audience?
Yes, I'll actually sign off the way that I do on all of my podcast episodes with 3 truths and, well, I guess a 4th truth. I see you. I am so proud of all of you and the work that you're doing in the world, and I love you. Because even through grief, in the midst of all this, we are growing.
Thank you very much. And with that, we'll say good evening.